Welcome back. In this episode, we will see how Elyx can store data across sessions. So you could, for example, create a database of blog posts, or register users for your new product, or perhaps collect emails for your newsletter. For that, we will create in the canvas a new SQL database table node. This node lets Elyx know that it should set up a table structure in the background, so we can store strictly formatted data entries as rows in a table. Given that database tables require a database where they live in, Elyx will automatically create a database node if none are present in the canvas when the first table is added. You can also add databases on your own and not attach any tables to it. You could do this if you wanted to manage the structure of this database on your own or from another app. For example, you could come to Elyx to provision a blank database and use it as the storage for a different app outside Elyx, effectively, exclusively using Elyx as your cloud provider. The SQL database table node comes with one primary key property out of the box. You can modify its name and data type, but it is a required property that all SQL tables need, which must contain a unique value, so that rows can be differentiated from each other. You can add as many properties as you want. Each property represents one column in the table. For example, let's create a blogs table and a users table for a hypothetical app in which users can write and publish blog posts. We will modify the table node we have just created by renaming it to blogs. So each row in this table of our database will store the information for a blog post. Let's modify the default primary key and rename it to blog ID. A blogs table could have a title property of type text, a body property for the main body text of the article, and a publication date of type date. Elyx automatically creates a test version of your database and its tables in the background. This is only available to your canvas. You can find it in the bottom right of the table node. If you click on it, you can open a menu in which you can add, delete, or modify rows directly in the test database's tables. Now, let's create a new users table. Rename the primary key to user ID, add a first name and last name text properties, as well as an email property. If we go back to our blogs table, we can add a new property called author. And what is special about this property is that we want it to reference a specific row in our users table. In other words, each row in the blogs table will now always need to be linked to a row in the users table. We do this by adding a specific property to reference as the data type of our new authors property. The only condition is that it is a property which has a unique value in the targets table. We could make the emails property unique, so there can never be two users with the same email. Then we could reference that property. But we already have the user ID, which is the primary key of the table, and it must always be unique. Now, if we try to add a blog post row, we see that it requires a new column, author. So let's create a new entry in the users table, then use its ID to reference it from the blogs table. When we do structural changes to a table which already has data, Elyx will try to keep as much of the data as possible in the Canvas test database. However, this might not always be possible, so any rows that cannot be automatically transformed will be removed by Elyx. For example, imagine that we change a property from text to number. Elyx wouldn't know how the transformation needs to be applied. But of course, deleting existing rows is not an option with real data on the live database that the project has previously published, because those real databases might contain user data which you wouldn't want to lose. Every time the project gets published, as part of the publication steps, Elyx will transform the structure of any pre-existing live database and its tables to match any changes that might have been done in the canvas. Therefore, if you make any incompatible changes to the database tables, Elyx will ask you to fill in a row transformer. This is a one-time trigger whose whole purpose is for you to add the logic necessary for transforming the old rows into new rows. For example, let's say you add a new required column to a table. Each existing row in the database now needs some new value for that new column, because as a required column, it cannot be left empty. Elyx will not on its own decide what that value should be, but will instead ask you to create any logic necessary so you can decide for each row how the transformation should happen. The row transformer calls its transform row trigger once for every row already in the database. On this trigger, we have one input for every old column in the table, and the output must match the shape of the new table. In other words, we receive the old row and we must return the new row. So you can bridge the gap however you want. We can also decide to skip rows by simply outputting nothing. Elyx will understand that you did not want to or could not keep that row. If anything went wrong, like an uncaught error being thrown in the custom logic of the row transformer, the publication of the project would fail. Elyx would then try to execute the reverse row trigger for every row, in order to revert the partially executed migration, in an attempt to restore the database to the state it was before the publication started, so your users can continue to use the app without downtime. Once a row transformer has been used by a publication run, Elyx will freeze it, and you will not be able to modify its logic anymore, forever. And that is all for this episode. We have seen for the first time the concept of data types. In the next episode, we focus specifically on that. Data types are how Elyx determines what values are allowed to be used in different places, or where they can be connected to. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so YouTube notifies you when Elyx posts more tutorials or announcements. See you in the next video.